Pringle, please.
Thank you, Corda, and I'd like to fully support the motion tonight, although I would agree with some of the other deputies that the motion actually is worded very conciliatory and I think should be a lot stronger in calling for investment in our local and regional roads because it is vitally important. And it is true to say that our local and regional roads have suffered over the last 8 years since the recession started, and the funding has been slashed across the board. And that basically is a very short-sighted policy, because what it is doing is storing up problems for the future. And we see that's happening. We see the condition surveys that have taken place are flagging up that massive investment is required to bring our roads back to a reasonable condition, and a condition that people can have faith in, and that's vitally important. And I think, when the announcement was made a couple of weeks ago in relation to the funding for our regional and local roads, much was made of the fact that there was a 9% increase in funding. But when you drill down into the figures, and particularly in relation to my own county in Donegal, we only received a 1% increase in funding. And when you look at the detail in those figures, they actually see that there's a 42% reduction in the specific improvement grant for County Donegal, which means that those problem areas that have been problems for many years can't be addressed within the county. We look at a condition like Finter Bridge in my own part of the county that we've been trying to get replaced for many years. And with this level of funding, the council will never be in a situation that they can actually deal with those issues. And unfortunately, most of our bridges across our county will have to actually collapse before they'll actually be dealt with. And funny enough, when they do collapse, there's any amount of funding available to actually fix them and to replace them. So, I mean, many communities are looking at that as being the only option to ensure that the infrastructure can be actually replaced and renewed. The funding provided this year to Donegal County Council will allow for the improvement and restoration of possibly around about 3% of the road network in the county, which means, as other members have pointed out, that you're looking at a 30-year cycle to actually get around the network in the county, and that's just not feasible, and it's not acceptable, and as I said earlier, it is storing up problems for the future. So we're going to hit a crisis point in the years ahead, in the next couple of years, where the investment will have to take place, because simply roads will disappear, will start to just fail completely, and people will not be able to use them. And that's the legacy of the crisis and the recession. And when we hear all the talk about recovery and keeping the recovery going and that things are turning around, but when you look at the funding for our roads, there certainly is very little evidence of any recovery taking place and things turning around and funding starting to be restored to allow the local authorities to actually have a realistic programme of renewal for our local and regional roads. And also, I think it's very disappointing as well in 2017, because much was made of it during the negotiations on the formation of the minority government, that the local improvement schemes would actually be returned in 2017, and we see that that hasn't happened, and it's not likely to happen. And local improvement schemes, as has been pointed out by other members, are vitally important to families and individuals living in rural areas who simply can't afford to maintain the lanes that they live on. And the local improvement scheme provided a very good scheme to enable them to actually, with the assistance of the grant aid, to improve those lanes and maintain them and keep them in a reasonable state. And so I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is a deterioration right across the board, a continued and accelerated deterioration, which is going to lead to the fact that we're going to have to pump in additional money to actually take things back again. Whereas if we maintained at a proper level and at a reasonable level, I think Donegal County Council used to be able to work on an 8-year cycle in terms of the renewal and the restoration of our county roads, and that in itself is reasonable, and that's a reasonable type of funding that local authorities should be able to expect from the government, and that would maintain our roads in a passable condition, and actually would make financial sense, because it would make far more financial sense to provide an adequate amount of funding that the roads could be dealt with on that 8-year cycle, and you could actually ensure that a reasonable condition is kept on all your county roads, because there's no doubt we're going to have a crisis in the future in relation to our local and regional roads, and we're going to end up having to spend a hell of a lot more than the government has been allocating now.